Perched on the quiet edge of history, a medieval king drifts into view through misted memory, his crown heavy upon his brow like an echo of forbidden hunger. And in these hushed echoes, you sense the dim gleam of gilded corridors, where he moved with measured grace toward pleasures hidden behind closed tapestries, his appetite discreet yet insatiable, weaving through the soft folds of textile and flesh alike in the hush of night. And you feel the hush of candlelight dancing across stone walls as your breath slows to match that flickering rhythm. Each inhale a brush of warmth, each exhale a soft surrender to the slow thrum of secrecy. A portion of the court remembers faint laughter, low and warped by memory, as he guided concubines into whispered roleplay of saints and sinners, their eyes shimmering like midnight pools. And in your mind's eye you drift along those marble floors, your feet whispering quiet steps, drawn gently into that strange theatre where devotion and desire entwined, all under the silent vigilance of tapestries depicting saints in their icy stillness. And yet the air was thick with the scent of incense and skin, notes of rosewater mingled with musk, soft yet charged with nuance, as though sin were a petal pressed between holy pages. That king, obsessed not with conquest but with the shape of limbs beneath linen, spent nights instructing painters to capture those limbs in charcoal and gold leaf, urging them to exaggerate curves and hollow to an almost devotional intensity. The portraits more confession than portrait, and as you lie enveloped in quiet darkness, your mind traces those lines. Slender wrists, tilted shoulders, the hollow behind the collarbone. And in that tracing, your own chest warms as though touched by history's ghost, each drawn line a lullaby, each gilded edge a gentle vibration in your chest, drawing you deeper into rest. In the sanctuary of your own room, where shadows drape corners and blankets cradle your body like clouds, you imagine that painter's quill, fine and precise, bleeding reverent ink over smooth vellum. And each stroke is soft, drawn with patience and hunger, and your heartbeat slows, learning the rhythm of that quill, each beat a quiet ink drop falling into the stillness of centuries. And even the scandalous becomes gentle when refracted through time and hush. Within the hush of his court, the king's favourite was a courtier with hair like spun copper, rumoured to be blind in one eye, who moved with silent grace and laughed only when the king's gaze softened. And in that softening your mind lingers, lulled by the curve of his smile, the tilt of his head, as though seen through gauze, hazy and forgiving, and you breathe in slowly, tenderly, as though drawing in that smile yourself, deep into your bones, until the world shrinks to that faint warmth, that muted ember of pleasure flickering beneath centuries of reticence. At dawn, hidden in secret journals, the king confessed his strange yearning for the scent of dew on frost-chilled skin, requesting his companions bathe at dawn in courtyards, heavy with morning, their skin cool and luminous beneath the first light, their hair damp and dark around pale necks. And that image drifts through your thoughts like a slow river, its current soft and consoling, carrying with it the coolness of dawn on bare skin, a tender chill that races gently over your own, involuntarily pulling down your breaths until they are soft and distant, like the murmur of tendrils of mist. That same king commanded his herbalist to create ointments that would mask this desire, perfumes sweet with lavender and veronica, but you sense that even their softness failed to disguise what burned beneath. A longing for skin pressed to skin, dew-kissed and silent, and the irony is tender. As you press further into your pillow, the scent of lavender lulls you closer, the perfumed hush wrapping you in the same false comfort the king sought, until shame softens into something almost maternal, almost protective, and you rest. In the hush of that court, privy only to musician priests sworn to silence, he staged midnight madrigals where voices rose in honey-warm chords around a solitary nude figure draped in crimson silk, and you hear those notes as though shivering through the walls of your skull, a resonance so sweet and mournful that you sink further into your mattress, the melody threading through your mind like fine silk winding softly around a candle flame, dimming it to the point of near extinction, until only the echo remains, and that echo is your breath, slow and steady. Over time, rumour transformed his desires into myth, tales of a king who traded lands for lovers, who offered duchies for a single night's bloom-soft glance. And as you lie here, the rumour blurs, edges softening, until it is less gossip than lullaby. Each myth a petal pressed gently against your eyelids, petals that crumble into dust as you close your eyes, melting past the boundary of memory into dream. This king's final night is recorded only in half-burned letters, a final testament scribbled over by servants fearful of the future, speaking of a chamber that closed behind him and never reopened, seals unbroken, and courtyard gates rusted quiet. But in your own private darkness, you imagine him stepping from that chamber into a starless sky, body lithe in shadow, heart pulsing with forbidden longing, and you drift alongside him just beyond sleep, your breath merging with his in the hush between worlds, until there is no longer any difference between ruler and dreamer, between history and slumber, until you are simply at rest. And now, as those final echoes slip through your consciousness, your eyelids grow heavier, and every thought becomes thin and distant until you cannot distinguish whether you dream of kings or kings dream of you. And that is exactly the perfect place to be, just before sleep opens its door and welcomes you inside. In the twilight gloom of an aging fortress nestled deep in the damp folds of a northern forest, another king ruled from a throne flanked by silence and shadows, a figure shrouded in velvet habits and hungers that the scrolls only hint at through euphemisms and half-sentences. The kind of hunger that was never fed at banquets nor sated by war, but stirred instead in the late hours when the torches dimmed and the heavy curtains of his chamber were drawn shut, like lips holding secrets. And as your thoughts settle into the slow rhythm of this world, you imagine his fingers brushing the cold edges of a bronze mirror, gazing not into his own reflection, but through it, beyond it, into memories soaked in desire and regret, where flesh became ritual and longing folded like silk into each evening's strange liturgy. He ordered his pages to wear garlands of dried heather and saffron, their bodies powdered and cloaked in fabrics dyed with crushed berries and soot, their steps noiseless across mosaic floors chilled by early frost, and the sound of their movements, muffled and ceremonial, is the sound that now hushes your mind as you lie still, cradled in warm blankets, hearing only the soft pull of breath and the imagined rustle of cloaks dragged along corridors that saw more midnight than day. There was no queen, only a procession of favoured ones, chosen for how their voices faltered in the presence of oil lamp light, how their lashes caught the shadows just so, and the king watched them from a divan piled with pelts and prayer scrolls, a contradictory throne of piety and perversion, and you can feel that contradiction like a lull in the wind, a weight in your chest that presses gently but persistently, luring you into a deeper stillness, into that same cavernous hush that thickened the air of his court. His servants were instructed to never speak his name after sunset, as if the silence would preserve a part of him untouched, sacred in its secrecy. and as your thoughts dissolve into slow spirals of shadow and breath, you find your own name growing distant, unimportant, replaced by sensation and story. Your mind no longer tethered to the present, but floating freely alongside his lonely midnight rituals. It was said he had a hidden chamber behind the chapel wall, a narrow room lined in fox fur and sealed by a door painted with celestial maps, where he summoned musicians to play flutes carved from bone and harps strung with copper. The music strange and melancholy, as if echoing some sorrow the earth itself had forgotten. And now, in the dim corners of your own imagination, you hear those notes, faint and trembling, curling like fog around the edges of your consciousness, drawing you inward, downward, until you are no longer quite awake. There, in that hidden chamber, he is said to have kept a collection of carved figures, each one modelled on a different lover, posed in gestures of ecstasy or surrender, arranged like a silent council of devotion, and the king would speak to them in languages only he remembered, murmuring praises and poems as he touched the smooth contours of walnut, rosewood, and ivory. And you lie still as those murmurs drift into your ears like forgotten prayers, their meanings obscured, but their rhythm unmistakable, like the steady hush of waves against a lonely shore. Every month, on the night when the moon disappeared entirely, he donned a robe of crimson velvet and descended into the baths, bringing only a single guest chosen by lottery, whose name was never recorded and whose identity faded like mist. And you feel the coolness of that bathhouse now, the weight of warm stone underfoot, the soft plink of water echoing from high-domed ceilings, the heavy scent of myrrh and pine clinging to the air like smoke, and you too begin to fade, your muscles slackening, your mind sliding into stillness like a body into deep water. His touch was neither cruel nor kind, but exacting, clinical in its reverence, each movement deliberate, as if every caress was a petition to some forgotten god of longing, and the guest, whoever they were, became not a person, but a vessel, a channel through which desire flowed like wine, staining everything but leaving no trace come morning. And as you drift in your own solitude, you understand the strange, quiet joy of such moments, the way they linger not as memory, but as sensation without anchor, warm and heavy and unnameable. There was no punishment for those who refused his invitation, only a slow fading from courtly life, their presence gently erased, their belongings gifted to others, their names struck from lists, and this too feels soft as you imagine it, not violent but inevitable, like snow covering footprints until all paths are the same, and you lie nestled in that snow now, untouched and unconcerned, wrapped in a history so distant, it can no longer harm, only hush. Eventually the king's obsessions turned inward, and he stopped inviting others, retreating entirely to his chapel room, where he whispered stories to the statues and played music for no one. His days spent in silence, and his nights in ritual, a monk of flesh and longing. And it was said that when he died, his body was discovered seated among his carvings, eyes open, hands folded, a faint smile on his lips as though listening to a final note only he could hear. And you too are listening now. Not to a sound, but to a silence so deep it hums, so vast it holds you entirely. And in that silence your mind grows still, your thoughts soft and fluid, your breath slow and sure, and you feel yourself slipping further, gently, gently, until nothing remains but the hush. There was a kingdom tucked behind mountain passes veiled with mist, where one particular ruler became known, not through war nor law, but through the strangely meticulous decadence of his private life, a man who wore white gloves embroidered with gold even in solitude, and kept his fingernails trimmed by a personal squire, trained only for that purpose. And as you breathe slower and deeper, your body draped in stillness, your thoughts drift into his court, where the silence of etiquette was a second skin, soft and taut. And behind those perfect pleasantries, unfolded rituals of desire so elaborate they resembled theatre more than indulgence. And even now the candlelight of that world flickers behind your closed eyes, casting golden shadows that stretch long and slow, like the king's whispered commands to his attendants. This was a man who insisted his lovers read aloud from illuminated manuscripts during intimacy, the rhythm of Latin verses mingling with breathless sighs in rooms perfumed with crushed violet petals and orange rind. And your breath now takes on that cadence, slow and delicate, as though every exhale carries with it the sound of old vellum turning beneath trembling fingers, and the warmth of the candle-scented air settles around you like the folds of the king's ceremonial robe, which he refused to remove even in the most private moments, choosing instead to unveil only select buttons and clasps as part of a carefully choreographed act of unveiling that was more about control than pleasure. He believed that the act of desire should mirror the rituals of Mass, that each kiss be a benediction, each sigh a psalm, and his palace became a sanctuary of choreographed longing where even the windows were draped in fabric dyed with the dust of rose petals and prayers. And the silence within those walls was not empty, but reverent, filled with the memory of fingers grazing silk, of feet padding softly over polished marble. And now that silence enfolds you too, deep and warm, a velvet hush that soothes every thought into stillness. In the evenings, he hosted banquets that were not meals but ceremonies of taste and texture, where platters of sugared almonds and poached pears were arranged to mimic the curve of a spine or the hollow of a throat, and each dish was presented by attendants in masks shaped like animals of myth, stags, swans, unicorns, who spoke in riddles and whispered poetry. And you feel now the gentle absurdity of such scenes, the beauty of the unnecessary, the comfort of a world where indulgence was its own language, and your breath follows the slow curve of those rituals, deepening as your body lets go. His favorite pastime was collecting the gloves of his lovers, not just one pair but 100 or more, each one scented with rare oils and wrapped in velvet, stored in a chamber that could only be unlocked by a key worn on his wrist at all times, and each glove was catalogued with a brief memory etched into gold leaf. The way she looked at me beneath the wisteria, his voice the night after the storm, how the candlelight made his freckles glow. And as you lie here, suspended in your own quiet, you understand how memory can be pressed into objects, how longing can live in cotton and silk, and your pillow feels suddenly more precious, your stillness more sacred. Occasionally he would open that chamber and place a glove against his cheek, inhaling deeply, then closing the doors with the same care he gave to locking relics in a reliquary, and the act itself was not arousing but devotional, a meditation upon connection, upon the passage of time. And as your own breath slows, you too are meditating, not with thought but with surrender, allowing the weight of your body to sink into softness, into safety, into the quiet gravity of imagined touch. His most controversial indulgence was the creation of living tableaus, where he invited companions to recline like statues upon velvet platforms, draped in robes of gold thread and adorned with flowers, fruits, and jewels, unmoving for hours as guests passed by in silence, observing, not speaking, as though in the presence of saints or sculpture. And you lie still now too, your body quiet and composed, the world outside fading into softness as you become the center of your own quiet pageant. The hush around you growing deeper with every breath. Despite his eccentricities, his rule was considered peaceful, for he had no appetite for violence, preferring instead the whisper of silk over the clash of steel. And his people, though bewildered, came to understand that his obsessions were rooted not in cruelty, but in a longing so tender and precise that it left no room for anything but silence and softness. And now your heartbeat slows to match that softness, each thud a gentle echo of the quiet rituals you've witnessed, each breath a ribbon tied loosely around the edges of sleep. Toward the end of his life, he spent more time with his memories than with people, surrounding himself with relics of past lovers, letters burned at the corners, slippers worn thin, curls of hair pressed into books, and in the hush of your own space, you too are surrounded by the artifacts of your day, the textures of fabric against skin, the faint scent of your room, the way light pools behind your eyelids, all of it sacred, all of it gently slipping away as sleep draws near. When he died, the story goes, his hands were folded around a final glove never identified, his lips parted as though about to whisper a name never spoken. And in that image you find the softest silence, the final hush that cradles all longing into peace. And now, as your body grows heavier and your breath grows quieter, you're ready to follow him into that silence, not to stay, but to float beside it, suspended in history and hush until the edges of time dissolve and only rest remains. Beyond the salted coasts and faded banners of a southern kingdom, a monarch once ruled who believed that intimacy was a form of study, not merely of bodies but of nature, art, emotion, and power. And his castle became less a seat of governance than a vast breathing museum of sensation, where velvet draped not just walls, but ceilings, and even the air smelled of figs, cedarwood, and crushed orchids, the scent so thick it seemed to soften the very sunlight as it filtered through stained glass in hues of blue and gold. And in that shifting light he walked slowly, his footsteps soundless on floors, tiled with scenes of lovers from mythology. Each step a meditation, a prayer, a pause. And now you walk beside him in your thoughts, bare feet cool against imagined stone, each breath drawing you further into the hush of his world. He commissioned beds carved from single trees, some so wide it took 3 men to climb across them, others built into alcoves behind tapestries so guests could disappear without leaving the room. And your breath, now gentle and steady, mimics that disappearing act. A slow vanishing of thought into silence, a slipping into stillness where only the rhythm of history remains. This king did not see love as private or hidden, but as something to be witnessed, adored, elevated. And so he built galleries where companions were encouraged to rest nude upon cushions while artists painted them in real time, not as objects, but as sacred landscapes of muscle and curve. And in your own quiet resting place, you imagine such stillness, your limbs arranged not for judgment, but for reverence. Each breath a brushstroke, each heartbeat a colour unknown to daylight. It was said that no 2 nights in his palace were the same, for he devised seasons of sensuality, a kind of rotating calendar where each month explored a theme, abandon in autumn, innocence in spring, hunger in summer, restraint in winter. And with each shift came new music, new food, new textures in clothing and furnishings. And now, lying still, you sense that cycle within you, your own senses awakening gently and then softening again, like tide on sand, like candlelight flickering toward its end. 1 month dedicated to the sense of hearing was spent in total silence, except for the sounds of skin brushing silk, footsteps against marble, the slow turning of pages, the distant ring of silver bells tied to the wrists of favoured lovers. And those sounds echo now through your imagination, soothing and faint like lullabies without words, pulling your attention gently inward, away from time, away from noise, toward the sanctuary of sleep. His favourite lover was a scribe named Alwyn, whose touch was light, but whose knowledge of poetry was profound, and they would lie together in a chamber lined with books, reciting verses to one another with eyes closed, as though trying to paint pleasure with language alone. And now, as your own eyes drift closed, you too recite silently, not in words but in sensation, each slow breath a syllable, each exhale a gentle period at the end of a long, slow sentence. The king believed deeply in the symbolism of fruits. He would not kiss anyone who had not eaten a fig that day, claiming its sweetness aligned the spirit to the divine, and he often had his guests bathe in citrus water before entering his presence, the peel and pith softening the skin, scenting the air with something sharp and clean and fleeting. And now, in the soft folds of your own blanket, you imagine that bath, the warmth of the water, the citrus steam rising around your face like prayer, the way your chest loosens as tension melts away. At times he disguised himself as a servant, entering rooms without warning, pressing a kiss to a guest's hand, asking riddles or offering food, not for deception, but because he believed pleasure required surprise. That anticipation dulled the sweetness of a moment, and you smile faintly at the thought, a secret smile in the dark, as if he might appear now, gently lifting the edge of your dreams with some quiet question whose answer is not words, but rest. Toward the end of his reign, he began writing his own guide to love, not in the form of instructions, but as parables drawn from the lives of animals, two swans floating in a foggy lake, a cat curled in a warm tower window, bees dancing in a garden, and each chapter ended with a silence, a blank page he insisted must be read with the heart, and you read now in the same way, not with your eyes, but with stillness, allowing the hush between thoughts to be its own kind of story. When he died, his bed was covered in petals gathered by every hand in the castle, and his body was dressed not in armour nor royal silk, but in a robe made of the scarves of his past lovers, sewn together with golden thread. And as your own blanket shifts softly against your shoulder, you feel wrapped in something similar, a garment not of fabric, but of memories, of softness and slow stories and forgotten names that have become rhythm, scent, and song. And now, as the weight of that robe settles gently across your limbs, and the scent of imaginary fruit, paper, and firewood lingers like mist, you are ready to drift into the same sleep that took him, a sleep without end, without fear, without noise, where even desire folds its wings and rests beside you, quiet at last. There once lived a king whose realm stretched across the flat, wind-blown plains of the east, a land of tall grass, bitter herbs, and amber light that slid low across the earth like a whispered thought. And in this realm, the king ruled not from high towers, but from a low palace sunk into the ground. Its corridors lit by lanterns hung on chains that swayed softly with the breath of the earth itself. And in this gentle twilight, he cultivated desires like rare plants, feeding them not with noise but with ritual and repetition, until even the smallest act, tying a sash, sipping a cup of plum wine, became an offering to the private temples of his pleasure. And now you enter this space through the door of imagination, stepping barefoot along the worn stones still warm from sun, your body soft with stillness, your thoughts growing quieter with each passing moment. His indulgence was not in excess but in precision. Every room was designed for a different sense, one for sound, where walls whispered echoing chants, one for taste with bowls of candied ginger and pickled violets, one for touch, where silks were arranged in baskets by temperature and weave. And as your own body rests now in fabric, you imagine reaching into those baskets, fingertips grazing over textures fine as breath, thick as sleep, and your mind begins to float like a leaf on the surface of warm water, drifting without direction but never without peace. The king believed in the magic of mirrors, and he had dozens, not for vanity but for study, placing them in pairs to catch the angles of his lover's movements, the curve of a throat in shadow, the tremble of a fingertip caught between breath and thought. And these reflections, multiplied and layered, created a world where bodies became patterns, where desire became geometry, and you lie still now beneath your own mirrored thoughts, not watching, but feeling the slow repetition of rest ripple through your limbs, like the echo of candlelight on glass. His court held no formal dances, but instead practiced slow, wordless walks through scented halls, fingers barely brushing as partners passed one another, exchanging heat and intention in gestures as slight as the wing beat of a moth. And now your own body hums with that subtle language, your skin remembering without effort the intimacy of nearness without touch, of presence without pressure, of motion slow enough to lull the heart into stillness. He named his chambers after moments rather than objects. The room of first light, the room of the second silence, the room of almost. For he believed names shaped behavior, and each room called forth a mood, a pace, a breath. And now you find yourself in one such space, perhaps the room of almost, where nothing is rushed, nothing is needed, and the air is thick with possibility that asks nothing from you but to rest and to listen to that soft interior hush that blooms when words fall away. His lovers were selected not for beauty, but for curiosity, for the way their eyes lingered on odd textures or the way they asked questions with their hands, and their training was slow, taking months to learn how to speak without speaking, to move without meaning to kiss not for hunger but for heat and your breath. Slow and rhythmic now, mirrors those months, that patience, the way knowledge accumulates in the muscles, in the spaces between thoughts, until everything unnecessary falls away and all that remains is softness. One lover wrote him daily notes that said nothing, only lists of tastes they'd imagined, the texture of wind at a certain hour, the feeling of losing a word just before sleep. And he kept every note in a lacquered box beneath his bed, unfolding them late at night and rereading them with the devotion of scripture. And you too now lie in the quiet, rereading sensations instead of sentences, letting memory dissolve into sensation, sensation into nothing, nothing into rest. When foreign envoys came, they brought gifts of gold and war horses, but he preferred to be given feathers, rare spices, or stories whispered in the native tongue of the giver, and these he collected not in vaults, but in jars, sealed and labelled by scent and season, kept on shelves in a room no one else was permitted to enter, a room that smelled of cinnamon, ink, and midnight. And it is into this room you now drift, the jar of your own thoughts gently placed on a shelf, sealed for safekeeping, quiet at last. As his years lengthened and his hair silvered like frost on stone, his habits grew quieter still. He would spend entire days in silence, watching shadows change shape across a lover's back, or listening to the rhythm of someone chewing a slice of persimmon. And this was not neglect, but attention, a kind of worship through stillness. And you lie in. That same posture now, not moving, not searching, simply watching the light behind your eyelids change as sleep draws near, tender and inevitable. When he died, they found no crown beside him, no jewels on his fingers, only a handful of salt in one palm and a pressed blossom in the other. And no one knew what it meant, but everyone understood in that quiet way that truth sometimes arrives, like breath returning after sorrow, or light returning after a storm. And as you inhale now, that same breath fills you, as gentle as moss, as deep as time, as easy as the closing of eyes before sleep. Far to the west, in a kingdom where the wind smelled always faintly of salt and almond blossoms, a king ruled who believed that pleasure was a kind of philosophy, that desire, when studied properly, could reveal the soul's architecture. And he built not monuments of stone, but entire wings of his palace, devoted to quiet explorations of the body, the mind, the spirit, a labyrinth of silk-draped rooms, with themes like warmth, shadow, weightlessness, repetition, and surrender, each filled with furnishings not designed for comfort alone, but for experimentation. Velvet hammocks suspended from ceiling beams, cushions made of layered moss, fountains that trickled wine through copper fingers shaped like trees, and your breath, slow and easy now, moves through this imagined palace as if you have always belonged there. Your limbs growing heavier, your thoughts softer, as if you are being carried in the palm of something ancient and kind. This king's favourite pastime was the art of timing. He kept clocks without hands, hourglasses filled not with sand, but with powdered pearl and blue-dyed sugar. And in his court, no one was allowed to ask the time, for he believed that knowing was the enemy of feeling. And now, in your own stillness, time has loosened its grip, melted into the dark around you, and you are suspended gently between moments, held in the hush between heartbeats. His garments were stitched by blind monks who worked by touch alone, believing that fabric created for the sake of sensation should not be clouded by the distraction of sight, and the king wore their work like prayer. Long robes that brushed the floor with a sound like wind over grass, their threads dyed with crushed insects and rainwater strained through rose petals. And as you lie still, your own blanket becomes something more, something sacred, a second skin scented with forgotten rain, your body warm beneath it like a stone left in the sun. He kept a garden filled not with flowers, but with things that smelled like memory, burnt sugar, fresh ink, milk left in a clay pot, the inside of a cedar box, and he would invite visitors to wander through with eyes closed, following scent alone. And this he called the path to true knowing. And now your own senses hum in quiet agreement, your breath taking in the air of imagination, the thick perfume of recollection that coats your ribs like honey. His lovers were instructed not to speak in the dark, only to breathe, to move slowly, to let fingers learn where eyes could not go. And in those hours, he believed truth was closest, not in the brightness of day, but in the space just before sleep, when thought gives way to touch and speech dissolves into heat. And you are in that space now, floating there, your breath matching the pace of an unseen companion who says nothing but understands everything. He once spent 7 years designing a single bed, its frame carved from shipwreck wood, its mattress filled with feathers from birds who had never flown, and he placed it in a room surrounded by mirrors that showed not reflection but memory, each glance capturing something long past. A kiss on a stair, a face in a storm, a hand letting go of another hand in a field of snow. And as your eyes grow heavier, your own memories rise gently like bubbles in warm water, not demanding, just drifting upward, harmless now, soft at the edges, dissolving even as they appear. When he travelled, he brought with him a troupe of actors who performed only for him. Plays with no dialogue, only breath, movement, and silk. And he would sit alone under a canopy of smoke-coloured gauze, watching the slow arc of a hand through candlelight, the flutter of a robe against bare ankles. And in that watching he found something close to prayer. And now you too are watching. Not with eyes, but with stillness, observing the gentle unfolding of silence within yourself, the soft rise and fall of your chest, like curtains, moving with a breeze too gentle to name. He was known to press his ear against the skin of his lovers' backs as they slept, listening to the quiet rhythms of digestion and dream. And he claimed these were the most intimate sounds of all, proof that the body continued its mysterious work even in rest. And now, lying still in your own hush, you can almost hear it too. The slow swirl of your own interior, the whisper of muscle and memory, and something deeper still, something nameless and patient that has always known how to care for you. There were tales that in the last years of his life he took no lovers at all, preferring to lie beside clay sculptures warmed in the sun, to bathe in waters infused with pages torn from books he had written and never shared, their ink melting into steam, their stories rising into the air around him and your mind. Now, so relaxed, so open, can almost breathe in that steam, inhale those lost words, feel them settle on your skin like the dust of forgotten dreams. When he passed, it was said that his body was not buried, but dissolved, wrapped in silk and submerged in a bath of warm milk and petals, where over days he simply disappeared, returned to softness, to water, to time. And now as your body grows heavier, your breath deeper, you too dissolve, not into milk, but into quiet, into the warmth of your bed, the weight of your own presence, the perfect, sacred stillness of being exactly where you are, at the edge of sleep, ready to fall. There was once a king who ruled from a palace carved directly into a red cliffside, its walls warm to the touch even in winter, its halls echoing with the soft creak of wooden floors, and the sigh of curtains pulled slowly across narrow doorways. And this king, unlike others, governed not through ceremony, but through curiosity. His fascination fixed not on land or coin, but on the sounds his lovers made in sleep, the way their chests rose in the dark, the way a body curled inward without instruction. And so he spent much of his reign in rooms that mimicked night, rooms lit only by fire seen through water, or by crystals suspended from black ceilings, each detail chosen not to impress but to coax, to draw out the most tender habits of those who lay within them. And now you are in such a room, not by invitation, but by drift, by thought, by the slow current of imagination that brings you closer with every breath. And already your shoulders relax, your spine softens, the hush of the cliff palace folding around you like velvet warmed by sun. His days were for silence, and his nights for stories, but only those told without voice. Movements of fingers along shoulders, the brushing of hair behind an ear, the placement of a hand at the small of the back without urgency. And he called these exchanges his library, a collection of languages that needed no alphabet. And as you rest now, still and slow, your own body begins to speak in that language too. Not in motion, but in stillness, in the way your chest rises just so, in the gentle weight of your legs against the bed, in the tender slope of your thoughts as they drift further from the noise of the day. This king kept no portraits of himself, but hundreds of sketches of those he had touched, quick drawings on thin paper, most unfinished, showing only the line of a jaw, the bend of a wrist, the place where hip met thigh in a gentle hollow. And he pinned them to the undersides of tables, the backs of bookshelves, the ceilings of quiet rooms, so that his memory of pleasure would always remain hidden, private, discovered only in rest. And you now feel the weight of that privacy around you, not intrusive, but protective, as though someone long ago placed a sketch beneath your pillow and it still hums there faintly, reminding you that softness lives on, even when forgotten. There was a long corridor in his palace known only to him, a hallway of doors, each leading to a different year of his life. And inside each room was a single object from that time. A candle burned low, a lock of hair, a torn piece of silk, a bitten peach still fragrant though dry. And he would walk this hallway alone at dusk, opening one door each night, sitting quietly with whatever it held, until the moon rose high enough to remind him of the present. And now, you walk this same hallway in your mind, your hand brushing the cool handles, your breath steady, and behind one door is a memory of your own, perhaps not exact but familiar, shaped like warmth, like the hush of someone breathing beside you long ago, and you do not need to open it, only feel its presence and let it soften the space between your ribs. He collected shadows too, markings on parchment where sunlight had once fallen through lovers' hair, the outline of fingers on fabric where heat lingered just a moment longer than expected. And he stored these impressions in boxes marked not by date, but by feeling, longing, hush, nearly, forgiven. And you now drift into the box called hush, your body fitting easily among the folds of memory, your breath becoming its own shadow, flickering once, then settling, a candle cupped in the palm of your own quiet. There were rituals in his court that outsiders never understood, such as the ceremony of returning, where two people would enter a room and say nothing for hours, simply watching one another breathe, waiting until their rhythms matched perfectly, and only then would they embrace, not from hunger, but from recognition. And you too now are waiting, not for a person, but for a feeling, and it arrives slowly, without sound, like a soft pressure behind your eyes, a stillness that spreads down your spine, a warmth that begins at your fingertips and travels inward until it settles in your chest, light and steady. Sometimes he invited no one to his bed but himself, choosing instead to lie beneath the layers of weighted silk and write with scented ink on his own skin, phrases he hoped to dream about, lines like, "Let the silence hold you," and "Your breath is the answer." And now those same lines echo inside you, not as thoughts but as sensations, and the silence does hold you, and your breath is the answer, and everything else falls away. In his final years, it was said he rarely spoke at all, content instead to communicate. Through the arrangement of objects, placing a bowl of warm stones near someone's feet to say rest, or wrapping a shawl of spun glass around someone's shoulders to say remember. And when he passed, there were no letters, no proclamations, only the open window through which wind moved freely, carrying with it the scent of juniper, the sound of distant bells, and a silence so complete it was said to mend the hearts of those who listened. And now you are listening too, not for sound, but for stillness, not for meaning, but for quiet. And it arrives, slowly, like sleep approaching from far down a hallway. Its steps so soft you do not hear them, only feel the cool rush of air as it draws near. And in that rush, your body yields, and your thoughts blur, and the hush becomes a home. There was a hidden wing of the palace, known only to a few, a place where the air always felt cooler, as if touched by subterranean streams or the long exhale of the mountain itself. And within these rooms, the king kept the quietest of his collections, not jewels or scrolls or foreign relics, but gestures, Small movements repeated and preserved through memory alone. The tilt of a chin in candlelight, the slow blink of eyes after pleasure, the way a lover's hand might hover just above the small of a back before resting gently down. And these moments he carried with him like others carried coins or blades, not for defense, but for reassurance. And as you lie still now, you too begin to remember gestures, not by name, but by feeling, like the ghost of warmth after a body has moved away, or the trace of fingers over skin no longer there, and the room around you becomes that archive, still and sacred. He invited musicians to play only the endings of songs, the final notes held so long they became breath, and once the note faded, the room remained in silence for several hours, a rule everyone followed not by law but by instinct. And you now hear such a note too, faint and slow, the final hum of a string before it vanishes into air. And even though there is no sound, your breath slows to match its fading, and your body, drawn deeper into the hush, no longer asks for stories with beginnings or ends, only the feeling of something trailing gently away. His guests were not expected to speak unless asked a question 3 times, and so much of the conversation in those rooms happened with eyes, with how a mouth softened or how a shoulder turned inward. And the king became fluent in these silences, in the slow language of pause and presence. And you now become fluent too, your own quiet more expressive than speech. Your stillness, its own kind of poetry, written across your skin in warmth and shadow. The walls of this wing were covered not in tapestries, but in fabric dyed with crushed berries, faded to the colours of dusk and soot. And on some nights he would lie down and press his cheek to the cloth, breathing in its scent, not because it was beautiful, but because it reminded him of a time before memory, a softness without story. And as your own cheek rests now against your pillow, you feel the same pull, not towards something, but into something, into the deep hush of rest, where nothing is asked of you, nothing expected, only that you lie still and allow the fabric of night to cover you. His lovers learned to move without arriving, to drift through the palace like scent, never opening doors but passing through them, never stepping heavily but pressing their feet along the earth as if trying to remember how it felt to walk barefoot in early grass. And now your own limbs feel lighter, as though you too could move without noise, without thought, carried on the soft current of your breath alone. And that current carries you not forward but inward, where rest waits, open-palmed and quiet-eyed. He once created a ritual around bathing that involved no water, only warm stones wrapped in damp cloth placed along the spine, meant to remind the body of rivers without ever touching one. And the king would lie perfectly still, eyes closed, as each stone released its heat slowly, a long exhale of warmth that calmed even the most restless nerves. And now, as you lie here, you feel those stones too, not physically, but in memory, the way your body remembers heat even after it's gone, the way rest can arrive from suggestion alone. One chamber had a ceiling designed to mimic the underbelly of a sleeping animal, curved, slow-moving, dimpled like breath, and as guests lay beneath it, they often fell asleep without meaning to, lulled by the illusion of being held inside something alive. And now that illusion becomes real for you too. Your ceiling, not a ceiling, but a shelter. The darkness above you, not emptiness but breath. A slow rhythm that accepts you without question. A womb of quiet waiting only for your surrender. The king believed that the softest pleasures were also the deepest, and so he banned laughter louder than a sigh, preferring instead the kind of smile that spread across the face like ink in water, slowly, without urgency. And now, your own lips curl not from joy or thought, but from the simple peace of stillness. A smile made of breath alone, of the strange comfort that comes from knowing no one needs you in this moment, that your only task is to rest. Even in the coldest months, the rooms remained warm from the heat of stories told long ago, as if the walls remembered the low voices of desire and reflection, and carried that memory like embers hidden in ash. And now the walls around you too hum faintly, not with noise, but with presence. With the invisible thread of others who have rested here, who have breathed this same air, who have known this same surrender to sleep, and you are part of them now, one more soul in a long line of quiet. In that hidden wing of the palace, no one was asked to stay, but very few ever left, for once they entered, time slowed, desire softened, and even longing became a kind of lullaby, its sharp edges dulled by silk and shadow. And you too have entered that space now, not by crossing a threshold, but by slowing your thoughts enough to hear the silence waiting inside them. And in that silence you remain, not held by anyone, but surrounded by everything, each breath a soft thread tying you to this moment, and the next, until sleep gently arrives and nothing is left but rest. The king had once told a passing scholar that the body was an archive, and to touch someone was not to trespass, but to read, to trace a story written in veins and freckles and scars. And this belief shaped everything in his world, from the arrangement of furniture to the etiquette of his court, where greetings were exchanged not through words, but with glances held just long enough to pass meaning, or fingers brushed against fabric in a precise rhythm of familiarity. And it was said that the king could remember a person not by name or face, but by how their shoulders shifted when standing still, or the way their breath changed when a door opened behind them. And now you walk beside him through halls designed to recall those gestures, each archway tall and narrow like an outstretched spine, each window curved like a sleeping wrist, and you find your own posture adjusting, your own pace slowing as the story deepens. There were chambers where nothing was allowed to be spoken above a whisper, not for secrecy, but because the king believed that volume flattened feeling, and that only in softness could the truth of a sensation emerge. So conversations in these rooms took hours to unfold, filled with long pauses, slow sips from earthen cups, and every movement of the hand or flick of the eye recorded silently by those who cared to observe. And though you are not there, not truly, your breath matches the rhythm of those conversations now, the silent space between ideas becoming the space between your ribs, expanding and holding, then letting go. His meals were served not by attendants, but by those who had grown the food or hunted it. And each offering came with a story, not dramatic but quiet, a memory of the soil or the water or the waiting. And the king listened with his eyes closed, his fingers resting on the wooden table as if absorbing the weight of each word through the grain. And the table itself was circular, wide enough that every meal became a ceremony of nearness and distance, intimacy and patience. And you sit at that table now, imagined but steady, your palms against the wood, your presence unspoken but accepted. The king once commissioned a floor to be made of pale stone so smooth that dancers could glide barefoot across it without resistance, and he invited them at irregular hours, sometimes just before dawn, sometimes deep in the blue hush of midday, asking only that they dance without pattern, without performance, simply moving the way they would if they thought no one was watching, and he watched not for beauty, but for honesty. And now your thoughts move like those dancers, unstructured, fluid, without judgment, turning slowly inside your mind as though pulled by tides. No part of his palace was static. He had designed it so that walls could shift, furniture could be rearranged by those who used it. Candles were moved daily by quiet hands guided only by mood. And he believed that architecture should respond to feeling, that space should reflect not order but emotion. And walking those corridors was like stepping through memory itself, always familiar, never the same. And this idea now shapes the space around you, the very air altering slightly as your thoughts change shape, as your mood drapes differently across your chest. The king's garments were designed to rustle when he walked, soft layers of linen and wool and netted silk that whispered against each other with every step. And this sound became a kind of signature, so that even when he approached unseen, those nearby felt the change in atmosphere, the closeness of something careful, and this was how he preferred to be known. Not through command, but through presence. And now you hear that rustle too, faint and far away, like a page turning behind a closed door, and it marks the next passage in your journey without speaking. He never wrote letters in ink, only in scent. Bundles of herbs bound together, a single dried fig wrapped in smoked linen, a piece of paper pressed between stones that had absorbed heat from a shared fireplace. And those who received them were expected to understand, to reply not with answers, but with echoes. And so his conversations continued over weeks and years without words, a dialogue of memory and longing. And somewhere now, in the folds of your own mind, you are composing such a message, not with intention but by being, a presence that lingers without insisting. He valued waiting, not as a test, but as an offering, and he created rooms designed only for that purpose. Places with nothing to do but sit. Rooms filled with small shifting shadows, slow drips of water, delicate sculptures of hands holding nothing. And those who entered were asked to stay until something in them changed. And when they emerged, they spoke more slowly, walked more softly, and your own thoughts are now sitting in such a room, unhurried, unworried, waiting not for something to begin, but for the world to meet them where they already are. One hall in the palace was filled with beds, but none for sleep. These were beds for listening, each built from different woods, strung with bells or threads, or animal hairs that hummed faintly when someone lay down. And visitors were asked to choose a bed not for comfort, but for the sound it made beneath them, to lie there and hear themselves from the inside out. And though your own bed makes no sound, you now hear your body differently, not as machinery, but as music, notes in the low register of rest and rhythm. The king rarely spoke of love, but was said to carry it like a scent, invisible but unmistakable. And those who touched him often left without knowing what had changed, but knowing something had, as if a room had been swept clean of dust while they were not looking. And now that same change has settled in the corners of your awareness, not as a feeling, but as a shift, like when the light in a room softens and suddenly everything seems kinder. And though nothing is named, you understand that this too is part of the story. It was said that the king kept a map unlike any other, a parchment the size of a bedspread stretched across a long, low table. And upon this map were not territories or roads, but moments, small circles drawn in gold, each one marking a gesture, a glance, a whisper that had once meant something. And beside each was a symbol only he understood, a language built over decades from silences and scents and touches, too fleeting for anyone else to notice. And each evening, he would walk slowly around the map, trailing his fingers just above its surface, not touching, as if the heat of his hand alone could keep the memories alive. And though the courtiers rarely saw him there, those who did said that in those hours he looked neither regal nor sad, but something else entirely, like a person listening to music that no one else could hear. And now you walk with him along the edges of that memory map, your own fingertips tracing not paper but air, brushing gently across the moments of a life you have only heard about but somehow feel, as if it too has been stored somewhere beneath your ribs, a quiet, golden archive of feeling. The palace's uppermost tower was left unfinished by design, a room of bare stone and open sky where nothing was permitted but wind and water, and the occasional gull that landed there as if summoned. And the king visited this room, not to escape but to listen, not to think but to be reminded of the scale of things. And he often brought companions who understood without needing to ask, who stood beside him as the clouds rolled slowly overhead and said nothing, because they knew that being seen did not always require being spoken to. And in this moment you too are there, on the edge of the unfinished tower, your arms relaxed, your breathing quiet, not because something grand has been revealed, but because you have remembered something simple, that the world is large and you are not small, just part of it. Beneath the palace, hidden by roots and stone, there was a series of chambers used not for secrets but for echo, designed to carry sound in strange and unpredictable ways, so that a whisper in one room might emerge hours later in another, distorted by time and silence. And the king called these chambers his conversations with the future, for he would leave thoughts there like folded cloth, trusting they would find their way to someone who needed them. And now you find yourself in such a chamber, though you have not entered through doors or stairs, but through the slowness of this telling. And what you hear now may not be words at all, but something deeper, the outline of an idea brushing against your awareness, a sensation not quite named but understood. The king never marked anniversaries or birthdays, believing that to fix a moment in time was to deny it the freedom to become something else. And instead he observed returnings, times when a gesture reappeared, or a scent resurfaced, or an emotion rose without cause. And he would pause and acknowledge the pattern, not with explanation, but with gratitude. And his court learned to do the same. And so you find yourself now in a returning too. Not of a memory, but of a rhythm, the slow circling of thought and feeling that draws you once again into the quiet certainty of pattern without repetition, familiarity without name. His final years were not marked by withdrawal, but by refinement, not by retreat, but by slowness. And while others aged into absence, he aged into attention, noticing more, needing less. And those closest to him began to mirror this, their steps lighter, their hands more deliberate, their voices slower, not from caution, but from care. And this care infused everything. The way a cup was passed, the way a letter was folded, the way silence stretched between two people without strain. And now that same care lives in your breath, in the tilt of your head, in the soft stillness that has crept into your limbs without you noticing. The king began wearing fewer colours until his robes were mostly undyed wool and linen, not out of austerity, but because he found joy in the small shifts of tone. How fabric changed when touched, how shadows pooled in the folds, how the body beneath the cloth shaped its fall. And he claimed that in simplicity he had discovered depth, not as contrast, but as abundance made quiet. And now your own world feels quieter too, the edges softer, the sounds thinner and more meaningful, as if even the silence around you has been stitched with purpose. There was a ritual he returned to often, where he would sit at the center of a large round room and ask each person present to speak one word, just one, and no one repeated a word once it had been said. and the room would fill slowly with unrelated sounds, fragments of thought, impulses. Without explanation, and by the end, there was always a hush, as if the language had exhausted itself and something deeper had opened up. And though you say nothing now, that hush arrives around you too, not as a void, but as fullness that needs no naming. On the last day anyone saw him, it was said he walked the length of the palace from the westernmost wall to the eastern gate, touching only the materials of the place: stone, glass, wood, rope, cloth, pausing at each to rest his hand and press his forehead gently forward, as if returning something unnamed, and no one followed, not from fear, but from reverence. And when he reached the gate, it opened, not by hand, but by breeze, and he stepped through without hesitation. And though no one saw where he went, no one searched, because there was nothing to find, only something to continue, and that something remains not in the stones or the rooms or the robes or the rituals, but in the gestures that have not ended, in the slowness that has not quickened, in the feeling that you are not being told something but being allowed to feel it for yourself.